come in, we'll acknowledge their arrival time. With that, we'll move on to agenda item 2, approval of the agenda. And I will open it up to a public comment on approval of the agenda. Is there anyone who wants to make a comment on a public comment on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the dais and see if there is a motion or any dais discussion on agenda item 2, approval of the agenda. No. Okay, so I'll move for approval of the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. With that, we'll do a roll call vote on approval of the agenda. Director Abrika?
Yes.
Director Stone?
Yes.
Director Combs is yes. Okay, so we'll have the agenda approved. With that, we'll move on to agenda item 3, approval of meeting minutes of November 2nd, 2023 and November 16th, 2023 special board meeting. We'll first go to public comment. Is there anyone who would like to provide public comment on agenda item 3, which is approval of the meeting minutes from the November meetings? Okay. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the dais for any additional discussion or a motion.
I'll move approval.
Okay, we have
Second.
A motion from Director Stone and a second from Director Abrika, and we'll conduct a roll call vote. Director Abrika? Yes. Director Stone?
Yes.
And Director Combs is a yes. So the meeting minutes of November 2nd and 16th are approved. Okay, with that, before we go on to public comment agenda item 4, just for the record, indicate that at 3:37, Director Eisenberg joined the meeting. And so with that, we'll move on to public comment. This is general public comment. And so anyone can address the board for up to 3 minutes on non-agendized items. I do have one public comment card for general public comment, and that's from Tom Reinfleisch. Mr. Reinfleisch, please come forward and provide your public comment. You said yours is general public comment, right? Or is it? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. All right. Yeah. That actually is indicated. The error is with the board chair. And that is indicated here. Okay. So is there anyone who would like to provide general public comment? I don't have any cards for anyone, but if anyone would like to provide general public comment, you may. Okay. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board and move on to item 5A. 5A and B are action items. And 5A is approval of the calendar year 2024 SFCJPA regular board meeting. Is there a staff presentation on this or any additional staff comment on this item?
What you have at your board packet and on the slides that we're showing here are the proposed dates, keeping with our regular board schedule of the 4th Thursday of the month at 3:30 p.m., except for November and December, when the 4th Thursday conflicts with holiday schedules. Those are on the 3rd Thursday of the month, as the last 2 months have been. And they are now designated as to location with alternative locations because the East Palo Alto chambers are undergoing renovation and we do not know for sure the schedule of their availability. So that is the only presentation. If, as last year was, there is some discussion about which summer month the board prefers to have summer recess, July or August. We've slotted in July. You may wish to discuss.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'll open this up to public comment first to see if there's anyone who would like to provide a public comment on 5A, which is the calendar for 2024. Okay. See no public comments on this, I'll bring it back to the dais, and this is an action item, so we'll need a motion in a second. But for any clarifications or questions from staff or any proposed changes, Director Eisenberg.
Thank you. Wait, do I have it now? Yeah. Thank you, Chair. And sorry for being a little late. So my question is, and it's okay if the answer is very wedded, is how wedded this organization is to having the meetings on this day and this time. I ask that just for a selfish reason that I have a standing conflict every other month. But in the new year, I may, and I've just been missing the other one until this previous meeting. In the new year, I may be able to not be on that other commission and instead get, a different assignment, but I'm not sure. Because I doubt that will change. Is there a reason for this particular day and particular time? Do you all know? Since I am new and I don't want to overstep or be demanding. Go ahead, Amy.
So historically, Thursday has always worked best for the board of this agency, and that's why Thursday has always been chosen. The board is welcome to reconsider another day, but this is the day that historically has worked at this time for board and public, honestly.
I don't know if it's a conflict for anyone else ever, but if it's not, I can.
Yeah, so I would be open to that discussion. I don't know the history, but I think for me the approach would be something along the lines of, I don't know if it's would be like a subcommittee to work with Miko and the staff, because I'd want to know what other sort of boards and stuff meet on certain days. We also have to factor in the availability of the chambers. And so I'm open for that analysis. That's not something, but as far as this, I think we would proceed with approving the calendar and sort of look for, like I say, it's a subcommittee or something that could work with staff to sort of do an analysis of other days. I would certainly be open to that.
Like a doodle poll or something even, because, again, I don't want to put anyone out, and I expect that booking the room is, can be complicated now. So yeah, I appreciate that.
And also to be clear, something that would work for the board and the community and staff.
And staff, yeah.
And so, yeah, something that looked to all stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. And I recognize that staff's schedule can be often the most busy, so definitely not wanting to inconvenience anyone.
Yeah, I would only as we look into this, so certainly, obviously, most councils meets on Tuesday, right? And so Tuesday, what does
Tuesday's hard, yeah.
Director Brica, do you guys meet on Tuesday too? And so then there's Tuesdays and possibly Fridays would be immediately off unless you want to do Fridays.
Or there's Wednesday.
So then I'd say, yeah, we'd probably be looking at something like a Wednesday or a Monday.
Yeah,
and so,
Monday.
But yeah, like I said, happy to explore. Executive Director Bruce.
And if it ends up staying at the same time, I'm good.
Yeah, happy to explore it. And I think the direction then would be, if I understand the board's thinking at this time, is that we'll go ahead and adopt what we have, and then we'll go forward in the new year with some conversation with stakeholders, staff, board members, alternates, et cetera, and we'll review our options.
Thank you.
Great.
All right. Any other comments or suggested changes to the current proposed agenda or a motion?
I make a motion that we approve the 2024 JPA regular board meeting calendar.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second, or a motion and a second to approve the calendar for 2024 for the Board of Directors. I'll do a roll call vote. Director Brica?
Yes.
Director Eisenberg?
Yes.
Director Stone?
Yes.
And Director Combs is also yes. And so that is a 4, and Director Pine is absent. So with that, we'll move on to 5B, the second action item. Consider adoption of resolution of intention to approve an amendment to contract between the Board of Administration, California Public Employees Retirement System, and the Board of Directors, San Francisquito Creek Joint Powers Authority. Is there any verbal staff report or communication on this agenda item?
I will hand this over to Miko for that.
So we do have one clarification on the item. Just give me 1 second. So we just want to note that the action item being requested by the board is to adopt the resolution of intention to approve the amendment to the contract with CalPERS. It is not to approve the contract itself. So it's misstated on the staff report, and we just want to make that clarification.
Okay, but it authorizes the presiding officer to sign the contract, correct? And so this doesn't come, well, it's an intention, it doesn't come back to this body after this.
We will have a different set of documents come back to the body after the Social Security Administration gets these documents from us.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there anything that, okay, I think,
Right, so the resolution authorizes the, I believe it's the presiding officer. I believe, would that be? Sorry, is that better? Okay. So the resolution, it basically like authorizes the signature to be made on the contract amendment. So then it can be signed, and then it would be signed by CalPERS. I don't know if it would necessarily come back. It might come back as an information item that it's been signed, but it wouldn't come back as an action item. This is the only action that would need to be taken.
so to the point that like if there was a board member who had some substantive comments, then now's the time
Correct.
to make it, or concerns. Director Eisenberg.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you could summarize what change this makes.
So back when the agency first started and signed the contract with CalPERS, well, when the agency first started, period, employees were paying Social Security and as well paying into their retirement benefit. This document basically states that that's what the agency is offering. CalPERS requires it to be in writing, and we did not have it in writing when the agency started. So that's what it is.
So it closes some administrative loops to
Exactly.
complete your, qualification for certain benefits?
Yes. There you go.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Any additional board questions or comment, or I'll also entertain a motion?
I move to, oh gosh, this is special. I move to consider adoption of a resolution of intention to approve an amendment to contract between the Board of Administration California Public Employees Retirement System and the Board of Directors of the San Francisquito Creek Joint Powers Authority.
Cool. Thanks. I'll second. Okay. With that, we'll with a first and a second, we'll do a roll call vote on item 5B. Yeah, and we did a public comment on this, right? I think so. I'm almost. Yeah. Okay.
No,
did?
you did
I
not
don't
ask
believe I
public
heard
comment.
Oh, we didn't. Okay.
No, you did not.
Okay. So then let's pause there and open it up to public comment for 5B. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment on this item?
I have no request to speak.
Okay. Okay. Seeing none, we'll come back to the dais and resume exactly where we left off with a motion and a second, and the start of a roll call. So, Director Abrica,
Yes.
Director Eisenberg,
Yes.
Director Stone,
Yes.
and Director Combs is a yes. So that's 4, and Director Pine is absent. Okay. With that, we'll move on to information items in 6A, which is Executive Director's report. And so I will turn it over to Executive Director Bruce.
Okay. I would like the board to indicate how much or how little detail from my written report would you like me to go over at this time? If you've had a chance to skim it, I'll be brief. If you haven't, I'll go into more detail.
Through the chair. I would say, because there's so many people from the public here, which is fantastic, I think for maybe their benefit, and it's not very long, I think it'd be nice to hear everything you have to say, personally.
All right. I know it is, I'm standing between folks and probably a long holiday, so I want to be respectful of people's time. So we are making great progress. We have had a great working relationship with the consulting team at Schaff and Wheeler, who have provided us a preliminary report, their independent review of the HEC-RAS model, and we talked about that a little bit at the last meeting. In summary, we are working with them to minor edits on their report to make sure that it is, how to put this, that the technical terminology that they're using is more accessible to the lay person rather than just the technical person, and filling in a little bit of the data gaps between the north side of the creek and the south side of the creek. The Palo Alto area has more overland flow information than the north side of the creek. That doesn't mean that the flooding didn't happen there. There's just less data about it. So we're closing some of those gaps and working with them to finalize the report. When it's finalized, it will be available. So in a very Reader's Digest version, the highlights of the report are, the conclusion is there's about 25% less capacity in the channel than previously thought. This has been confirmed by our hydraulic modeling as well as USGS. The December 31st storm provided a lot of really useful new information. An analogy I'd like to use, because I know there are a lot of people who are concerned that we should have known this information or had these details already. But back in the day, for example, when video games were first being developed, you would see a screen with just a few pixels on it, and characters would look blocky and sharp cornered. You could tell what they were, but there wasn't very much detail. Fast forward to the information we have now, with more sensors in the watershed, more eyes on the creek, more sophisticated tools available to us, and we have a much higher resolution picture of the watershed and the creek. And it isn't that the images or the information we had before was wrong, it was just less complete. And so we now have more detail rather than more inference or interpretation. We have more solid information to go on. Each major storm that comes in gives us more, to extend the analogy, more pixels in our screen, more pixels in our image. And so we can understand how the watershed performs in more close detail. The model we have come to understand is very sensitive, or the creek itself is also very sensitive to the way the edges of the creek, the banks of the creek, are lower or higher in some places. When the creek is brim full, very small changes in the surface elevations of what the model terms lateral structures, the things that are along the tops of the bank. It only takes a little bit of elevation difference to make a big difference in where the water will flow out. We have been reassured that the HEC-RAS model that we've been using is absolutely the appropriate tool for our work. And with the updated details within that model, we will have the confidence to go forward with our evaluation of project designs. Going back to that first point, with 25% less channel capacity than we thought we had before, it is prudent of us to look closely at our project designs, decide what things can go forward as fast as possible with no regrets. Don't forget, we have a both legal and an ethical obligation to not transfer risk anywhere in our community. So we are going to be picking the projects to move forward first that do not transfer risk, that are accomplishable with the plans we have as they stand. That first one is Palo Alto's Newell Road project. That will be moving ahead. Palo Alto, we met with them yesterday, and they have reaffirmed they are on track for a summer of 2024 construction. And as we've said, it's like working from the bottom up. That's the first step. We'll be working on completing that. The next step will be channel widening. We have reinitiated our work with the Army Corps of Engineers and taken them off pause. This hydrological information will go forward with the Army Corps of Engineers for their reevaluation of their channel widening project. We're hopeful that their review of the new hydrological information actually gives them a better economic cost-benefit ratio, and we'll move forward on the schedule we had planned. That may be ambitious, but that is our goal. After that, we are working with our member agencies to evaluate the previous set of alternatives looked at in the EIR. There were a full 17. Some of them may be suitable for expanding upon, utilizing, reconsidering, and some may again be worth just setting aside. We may also have, courtesy of our well-informed and engaged member agency public works staff, some new ideas to propose for new solutions or augmentations of the projects that we're already working that we hadn't thought of before. That process is going forward, and in your staff report, there is a Gantt chart that walks through an ambitious schedule of where we are with the hydrologic study, where we are with evaluating alternatives, and the steps through having a consultant give us a high-level feasibility and cost estimate for the first tranche of evaluated possibilities. We'll narrow the funnel down, and finally, the process we will have to go through and be compliant with CEQA for whatever project design adjustments we undertake. So there will be a supplemental EIR that we're in all likelihood looking at. I want to stop there in case you have any questions or comments. No, if
Is
not,
there
yeah.
or any board questions? Okay, sure.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for all the fantastic work you do. You're really making a difference in the communities. So I guess, and I probably brought this up before, but maybe I put you on notice. I was going to ask this, is that, so, you know, it may rain, it may rain really hard, and if it rains a ton and the Newell Bridge, or maybe more likely the Pope Chaucer Bridge, gets clogged up, what are the, I loved it, one of the public speakers several months ago talked about how in the past there were folks that were standing on the bridge and just fishing stuff out. Thank you for saying that. It was such a great image, and it really stuck in my mind of, wow, this is how the community really came together and you know, protected each other. But now, you know, people are so busy and the community's aging, and it may not be kind of as easy for community members to do that. Are there plans for anyone to be actively kind of taking stuff out? Will you describe what's going to happen with there?
Both the city of Palo Alto and the city of East Palo Alto have plans to have large pieces of equipment staged and ready, one at the Pope Chaucer Bridge and one near the University Bridge. Those are the key points where material tends to get hung up. The city of Palo Alto actually created a new sort of cement pad to facilitate the placement of that piece of equipment. Additionally, the Caltrans is aware of the sediment pileup underneath the Highway 101 bridge and is also planning on staging equipment nearby so that the crossing at West Bayshore, where that is also accessible by a large piece of equipment, can be another place where debris can be removed. Additionally, all of our cities have restocked their sandbag stations, have coordinated communications, have done a dry run and tabletop exercise with their public safety staffs, fire crews, subject matter experts for the creek, Valley Water, National Weather Service, and who am I missing? USGS? And yeah, so the gang was all there, and we ran through the scenario of, and if this happens, what do we do? So we've run through a practice scenario. I think we're about as prepared as we could be.
So, Kyle, just two quick follow-ups with that. Thank you for that. One is that, so I'm glad there's going to be equipment there. Are there also going to be people there On site to monitor, okay. And then just out of curiosity, I remember there was a conversation also about some cement thing that's in East Palo Alto that's blocking, or I don't know if it was, I can't remember if it was cement or not, that there's some impediment in East Palo Alto. I think, weren't you talking about that, Director Abrika? Do you all know what I'm talking about? Has that been removed? I think Kevin does, no.
Yes, that's the big concrete terrace. It's part of the widening project that we're
think that's
planning
part-
with the Corps of Engineers.
Okay,
I think that's just part of the whole project.
So it's
that
not-
we'll remove. It's not an immediate thing. I don't.
Okay,
It's a construction project. It's not a, debris.
okay, yeah, but is it blocking some of the flow?
It, like other narrow parts of the channel, it does constrict the flow, which is why it's been targeted as a channel widening location and a high priority spot for doing
Okay,
that.
so there will be people there kind of keeping an eye on it too. I don't want any, obviously, I don't think any of us want any neighborhoods left behind.
Right, so,
I don't know that structure specifically is on anyone's list, but that's right near the University Avenue Bridge. So there will be people right there keeping an eye on the entire area.
Great. I know that communities, in Palo Alto, even though I represent Valley Water, Greer and I, Director Stone and I both live in Palo Alto, and, there has been so much concern from the community. So, I really appreciate it. It's really, as we all know, it's really scary. Nature is very powerful, and we all want to do our best. So thank you.
and I encourage the board and the community to take a look at the City of Palo Alto's creek monitoring website, which is a very useful tool to watch what's happening in terms of rainfall in the higher watershed and how the creeks respond. It's an accurate, real-time view of creek levels. There are some that have visual eyes, so you can see what the view at the Pope Chaucer Bridge is and at West Bay Shore. So I encourage community members and board members alike. It's a useful place.
Cool, thanks. Oh, sure, sorry, Director.
Thank you. Wondering how changes to the design of Pope Chaucer and Top of Bank plan to be coordinated, and whether we have any time frame right now where we expect those projects to begin construction. I know you mentioned still anticipating seem to be optimistic, but do we have any ballpark figure?
I think that those project elements would be subject to the supplemental EIR, and so they would be reviewed publicly through the CEQA process. So there's about a year of study there for people to have the opportunity to weigh in on the benefits and impacts of any project changes such as you described. There are also other alternatives we'd be looking at to achieve the same objective.
Okay, so we're still looking at it 2025 at the earliest on those projects for construction?
Yes, so we were originally looking at 2024 for the Newell Road Bridge, 2025 for the channel widening, and 2025 or 26 for the other components. So 25, 26 at the earliest.
Okay. And I understand a lot of this delay, I think, has not been caused by the JPA. And I think a lot of it is the unfortunate consequence of the improper modeling on the creek capacity and reliance on external agencies that we have no control of. But I do hope that can be something that we're discussing more next year as far as ways that we can expedite this in any way possible, and kind of looking at that EIR process and that public engagement, which is such a critical piece. But I would imagine the public would be more interested as well in maybe shortening that timeline if that means that we could speed up that. I think we've been really fortunate that many members of the community have been so patient, especially the ones who went through so much pain in last year's flooding, and especially when you consider many of those same residents experienced that same pain back in 1998 and wondering what has been going on. And that has been challenging for me, and I'm sure all of us, to answer those questions to our constituents that I think are very reasonable. So I know that is our intention, but just kind of putting it out to see what we can do more of next year to be able to expedite all that. But again, thanks for all your work that you have been doing.
Absolutely looking at that. And I do want to acknowledge many of the community members have been very patient, and there is every reason to be impatient and frustrated. And having experienced a different kind of disaster myself, I can say, in my neighborhood, every time I smell smoke, I get scared. I can understand absolutely why anybody in these neighborhoods sees a rainy day and gets worried. So I want to acknowledge that concern and to reiterate our commitment to working as expeditiously as possible to find the funds, to get the permits, to get the designs right, to get the CEQA process done expeditiously.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I had one.
Of course.
So on the calendar, it looks like then around February is when we will get a chance to look at all the alternatives, right? That with the new data. Is that?
I'm thinking it was April, May. So consultant will provide conceptual designs and cost estimates for selected options, probably in the April, May, June timeframe. So May is SFCJPA members review and confirm and/or eliminate some options, estimated May 2024.
But in February, we get an initial review then, because it says, review EIR's final 17 alternatives, consider new options, and select a set of viable alternatives for further. So is it kind of reducing the number of options and then finally, or what?
Yeah,
But-
thinking of it as a great big funnel. So we'll have the Public Works team take a look at their own great ideas and the ideas that have been put forward before. We're going to meet. We're going to have probably a sticky dot party, and we'll figure out which things get voted off the island and which things we're going to ask a consultant to review and give us feasibility and cost estimates for. After
Okay.
that step, there will be some additional things that get voted off the island. And then we'll come back to the board with, here's the final suite.
All right, so this, but on February 24th, we will have a look already at, we will have a chance to, I just want to clarify that.
Are you asking if the board will have a chance to
Yes,
weigh in on the
right.
alternatives?
Not
Okay.
only the staff, but will the board also have a chance to weigh in that discussion, or at least, just so that definitely can tell between February and May is when, it's gonna.
If the board wishes, we can bring back the full set of alternatives and point out the ones that were eliminated and not moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be I think it's going to be important for us to review all the alternatives again, because I think after this past year, and rightly so, we know that things have changed, and it's almost like not starting from scratch, but really looking at it just entirely new, and also have the public, give them an opportunity to, again, rethink everything and not assume anything. So again, I'm looking at that one like, I'm not going to assume anything. It's like starting from scratch, and then with new information, as you say, maybe, the staff is coming up with some new things. The public, especially I think some public who are very well informed and follow this closely, that we almost do it as like, almost like a little study group of some sort. Because I think, I think the public is still, I wouldn't say the public lost a little bit of trust in this last year, but unfortunately it is one of those things that because there was that flood, because I've even heard some rumors, which I try to clarify, that say that somebody knew that the water was coming down and they didn't give a notice, almost like, all right, I'm just saying, that rumors are sometimes they surface when there's not full explanation, or people are expecting one thing or assured one thing, et cetera. So I'm just pointing that out as a reference that I think it will be important to have that in-depth discussion. Is the sooner the better, even though the decision won't be until further down, so that we can, really kind of come up with something that everybody feels okay about it. And then at some point down the line, I guess, I don't know if it can be a parallel process, but to discuss, again, I think the finances and the order of things, and even things like, we talk about the Pope Chaucer Bridge. I know that Newell Road is sort of technically assigned by the state as Palo Alto's bridge, so they had to take the lead in all of that. I'm assuming Pope Chaucer is Menlo Park, but I'm not sure. Or, how does that work? So anyway, I'm just saying that at the same time as we're considering the sort of technical part in the designs, that we begin some kind of outline or something as to what's involved, because ultimately that's, people are looking at that, okay, so when is, or I even heard, Vice Chair agree, like, well, when do we expect Pope Chaucer, for example? It doesn't have to be exact, but anyway, that's my point too. February, have it be still already the beginning of those discussions.
And for that conversation, we can have that hypothetical timeline map
Yeah.
of the major segments
yeah.
and the pieces, the major sub-pieces that have to feed into that. So, there are some things that have to happen first, and then that project can be constructed. So we'll have a simplified Gantt chart for everyone to take a look at and ask
Yeah.
questions about.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Just following up on that, oh, sorry, please go, Mr. Murray.
If there's more questions, I'll hold for now.
I just wanted to make sure, like I'm on the same page. And so when we talk about additional need for environmental study alternatives, that is in connection to the aspects of the project that we have determined transfer some risk. And so the projects, one of which is the Newell Bridge, which I know is primarily a Palo Alto project, but which we have played a role, and then creek widening are not aspects of the project which require any additional environmental analysis or will be subject to alternative.
That's right.
Okay.
It may be that we identify additional places for widening, and if that's true, and if those widening places are outside our existing project footprint, that may end up getting lumped into a subsequent supplemental EIR. But at the moment, those have not surfaced. I don't want to take that off the table if someone has a good reason to bring something like that forward. At this time, it looks like the Newell Bridge can be replaced. It does not transfer risk. It is only helpful. At this time, it looks like the places that the 4 identified locations for channel widening under the CAP 205 program can be completed. They're only beneficial. They do not transfer risk. They can go ahead.
Okay. And then other aspects of the project, certainly the central one being the Pope Chaucer Bridge replacement is one that we do know, or there is the analysis that does transfer risk. And so as we look at alternatives or additional environmental studies, it will be principally focused on that.
It'll be focused on how do we ameliorate the risk that the Pope Chaucer Bridge causes upstream and downstream of it, and what are the alternatives to address that?
The risk, just so in its current state, or the risk of a future Pope Chaucer Bridge?
Both.
Okay. Always the right answer, right? to an either or question.
Both
Okay,
and.
Okay. I do want to say, and then I know we have some public comment on this. I appreciate the idea of going back to and exploring some of the alternatives that we did not proceed with, but also this idea of new alternatives. I would caution that in those alternatives, there were some that had a very clearly visceral and negative reaction from the community. And that when you talk about a loss of trust over this year, I think I would say that we risk a very large loss of trust if we then seem to go back to those alternatives that there was clear public apprehension to, and then say that like, well, a new analysis, like when, so that's when you talk about rumors, like, right? That's when the trust erodes even further. When it's like, oh, well, new analysis now causes us to go and maybe bring up something of which had a very clearly like negative reaction from the public before. I'm not saying that we take things off the table, but I'm saying that we do risk, like, right, of bringing that up, of which really resulted in a delay of these projects. That exploration and that ideation of ideas and alternatives that were probably never going to really see the light of day really did back up, I think, the work of the JPA. And so I do think it's important to put that out there. Okay, I'm going to go to public comment and bring it back to the dais in case there are any additional comments from my colleagues. Okay, now, Mr. Reinfleisch, please come forward and provide your public comment. Yeah, you can.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you today about planning I'm Tom Fleisch. I live in Crescent Park, Palo Alto, and manage the neighborhood association group there, which includes over 1,000 people at this point. And I and my Stanford and community colleagues have been worried about the creek now for 25 years. And have been looking at various ways in which it might be managed so that flooding is less of a problem. I want to talk today about 3 points, and this is going to be a little bit long. I hope you can indulge me because I think these are important points at this crucial place that we are in thinking about redesigning the things that we want to do to control the creek better. The 3 items are: 1, the goals and criteria for REACH 2 flood control modifications. Ms. Bruce mentioned the business of transferring risk. The issue is that the creek is already set up so that there is a unnatural distribution of risk because of interventions that have been made in the past. For me, it's primarily Pope Chaucer Bridge, which was a big mistake made in 1948. There are other places where the banks are weak, where in East Palo Alto, there has been a historic flow into what used to be Whiskey Gulch. And I think Director Abrica has, and some of his colleagues have put up a plywood or supplementary control there to try to prevent that. And so this is a situation which is very complicated, where there are lots of things that have happened historically. And what we're trying to do is to put things in place that will make that a much more predictable and much safer environment. The second is maintaining creek conveyance. Ms. Bruce mentioned that the Schaff and Wheeler report, that there was like 25% reduction in the conveyance of the creek since the Noble Consultants calibration was done a decade or more ago with the Army Corps of Engineers. That came about because the creek has been filling up with vegetation and debris, which has not been removed in any effective way. And so I want to talk about how that has to be controlled. And the second are to reiterate the consequences of the incredible delays and essentially doing nothing. We are at this point at the same condition we were in 1998 in terms of what happens at the Pope Chaucer Bridge. So let me start. The initial plan, which is called, let me call it the preferred plan, which was thought of at the early stages of the JPA's work, intended for REACH 1 and REACH 2 upgrades to protect all parts of the creek, the residents in the creek, from the FEMA 100-year level. However, by 2014, it became clear that federal funding for this level of effort simply was not going to materialize. There was a big effort in the early part of the JPA to try to get that federal funding, and would not be forthcoming, and the achievable capacity of the creek in Reach 2 could not reach the 100-year FEMA level. It simply didn't have the natural capacity to do that. So on June 10th, 2014, there was a board of directors meeting of the Santa Clara Valley Water District. That was a public meeting of a proposed modification to the creek flood protection project being developed jointly with JPA. This modified plan would still raise the capacity of Reach 1 to at least the FEMA level and have Caltrans install a fourth bore under Highway 101. Both of those projects are now done. That's much to the benefit of the JPA work. For Reach 2, however, the modified plan would only seek to raise the conveyance capacity to a maximum level consistent with the adjusted native creek hydraulic properties and to share any remaining flood risk equitably and evenly among all residents along Reach 2. I note that almost none of the current JPA members, save Director Abrica, or members of the JPA, except for Kevin Murray, and the members of the city councils involved were involved with the creek in 2014. And so there's a history that I fear has been lost here. This decision by the Santa Clara Valley Water District, who is funding much of what's going on here through the approval of Measure B in the early 2000s and Measure S just a year or so ago, is I think, still a binding decision, philosophical decision about what we should be doing in managing the creek. So based on the Corps of Engineers Noble Consultants updated model at that time, 2014, it was believed that a capacity of about 7,200 cubic feet per second could be built into the Reach 2 modifications. This led to what has been the Reach 2 upgrade plan pursued by the GPA until recently, that is widening various pinch points, replacing the Newell Road Bridge with a clear span, enhancing the top of bank protections from Highway 101 to Pope Chaucer Bridge, and to replace the Pope Chaucer Bridge again with a clear span. The top of the bank walls downstream of Pope Chaucer were to be sized so that the pinch point widening and increased flow from replacing the Pope Chaucer and Newell bridges would not cause any higher flood risk for any group of residents there. Now, as you can imagine, this is a feedback loop. That is, what happens with Pope Chaucer Bridge is going to affect what happens downstream. And when you think about designing this as opposed to implementing it, you have to take that into account. That is, it's a system. You have to do the changes, evaluate what the risks are at various points along the creek, and then you decide if what you want to implement, and you would indeed implement from the downstream upstream. That is, you don't do the changes in such a way that's going to risk the downstream. So it's really important that the redesign that we've been talking about get done in that way. And it's interesting to note from the Schaff and Wheeler report that if you take 400 cubic feet per second out of the flow that the USGS measured, supposedly, I mean, I think the Schaff and Wheeler said there's something like a 20-25% error possibility in that measurement, that the creek did not overflow. That is, with the banks and everything else as it is now, the creek would not overflow it with that level. So what that says is, I believe that the current plan of Reach 2 is not really out of whack. That is, the basic ideas of the plan are correct, and it's a matter of adjusting things to take into account the debris and vegetation that has fouled up the creek. And so The key point of the modified plan is that it would not reduce the Reach 2 flood risk to zero. So the modified plan admitted that we are not going to be able to achieve the FEMA 100-year flood level. There will still be a risk of flooding in the Reach 2 after the changes that were envisioned with the modified plan. And so we have to be careful that we don't think about doing this in such a way that it's going to protect everybody against all possible future floods. That's going to depend on upstream detention. And I think the most promising thing in that area is the Searsville Dam modifications that can hold back a substantial amount of water so that we don't have to accommodate that in the downstream flooding. Now, the major flood event in New Year's Eve revealed that the overall conveyance has decreased by about 25%. The new road bridge replacement can proceed without any further consideration, and so can the correction of the pinch points. Those are going to be part of any solution to the Reach 2 modifications. So what is involved in this next study is to assume that the Pope Chaucer Bridge is removed with a clear span, assume the Newell Bridge is reduced with a clear span, and take out and fix the pinch points. At that point, it's a question of figuring out what the flood walls need to be along Reach 2 to contain the water with as much flow as we can accommodate. And we don't know what that's going to be now because of the 25% conveyance reduction because of the vegetation. And so there's going to be an iterative process that has to go on there. But we should be able to come up with a design for what it is possible to do with Reach 2, I think very quickly. We're not back at step one. And I think that it's possible to move forward with a modification of what we already know about the creek. There have been lots of really smart people who have been looking at this problem now for 25 years. And there's a lot that's known about the model. The model has been reasonably stable except for this business of the vegetative and debris congestion of the creek. That brings up the next thing that I want to talk about is maintaining creek conveyance. If we don't do anything about keeping the creek clear, this is going to happen over and over again. That is, the vegetation is going to continue to choke the creek. The debris is accumulating. This is done for the benefit of habitat for fish and wildlife. And I understand that. But there's also a question of the habitat for the human residents that live along the creek. And there should be a balance where the creek be held to a clearance stage, that is vegetation and debris content, that's consistent with the flood control model that we implement, so that the creek can be reduced risk for the residents without changing in the future. I would like to end with a comment about the consequences of the delay that has been going on. We've mentioned the 25 years over and over again. This persistent threat of winter flooding has a direct effect on many residents along the creek. And without mentioning the name of the person who commented me for privacy reasons, I want to read you a brief passage from a message that I got yesterday from a person who could not attend the meeting today. This starts, "We sent you photos of last year's flood that made it right up to our front doorstep on Hamilton and flooded our property. We were flooded in 1998 with about 2 feet of flood mud and water in our home and a year of reconstruction. So we are very upset at yet another delay, especially since it's already been 25 years. Unconscionable. I will add that because of the distress caused by the 1998 flooding of our home, those memories resurfaced after last year's flooding event and the nonstop threats of flooding with each atmospheric river that came through. In February, I ended up in urgent care with heart palpitations and sky-high blood pressure resulting in a cardiac MRI and a comprehensive cardiac evaluation. I have no history of heart problems or high blood pressure. Thankfully, my heart was fine and my blood pressure didn't return to baseline until after the flooding events abated. That is to say that even if flooding doesn't occur, the constant threat posed by the Pope Chaucer Bridge and the city's negligence to protect our neighborhood leaves us helpless and has serious effects on the well-being of residents. This is a repetitive story. I get this from every member, almost every member of Crescent Park, and I'm sure that the people in East Palo Alto have similar problems, and in Menlo Park who are affected by this. And so it is absolutely urgent that we do whatever we can to move on with getting a plan in place and implementing it. We will not be perfect, but we have got to do something to get this risk reduced as much as we can. Doing this every winter is just insane. I thank you for accommodating my comments, and be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you for your public comment. I'll go on to, I have one more public comment card for this item, and then I'll just open it up if anyone wants to public comment, but Mr. Wiley.
Hi, I'm Jim Wiley. For those of who might not know it, I live on Woodland Avenue downstream from the Pope Chaucer Bridge, and I have lived there since 1980. There have been 7 floods on the creek since the USGS started monitoring it. I've lived there for 6 of them. I'm 5 feet from the creek, so I'm quite aware of what's going on, and I've witnessed each one of them in great detail, including documenting several of them with pictures during and afterwards. The 6 events all were about 5,000 cubic feet per second. That's when the Pope Chaucer Bridge is full in terms of the visual level full, not full in the sense that no additional water could go through, because in some cases, as the water rises, a little more goes through. So 43 years of observation, 6 floods, 5 feet from the thing. I've been told that some of my observations are hearsay. I think in a court of law, firsthand witness would be, I guess, a firsthand witness to all that's happened in the last 43 years. I say that to preface my comments about the model and the calibration of the model, and some comments about the executive director's reports. But first, let me go back to the comment that I made last meeting about the clearing the Pope Chaucer Bridge. Director Eisenberg mentioned that I said that the community did it. It was not citizens doing it. It was police or firemen, I don't remember which. And they weren't pulling stuff out at all. They were actually using a pike and pushing down. And if you do that, the water sucks everything underneath. The Pope Chaucer Bridge has never jammed up because it is a clear span. And that's one place where Tom Renflish and I totally agree, is the bridge design should be a clear span, not something that has a big thing in the middle, which is what you're now 95% committed to doing. That will clog up. Your design has an impediment right in the middle. And I think the whole community would prefer a clear span. But all the money's spent, so probably you won't reevaluate that. Okay, so with that in mind, I'd like to comment on the executive director's report and comment, as I said last meeting, that the flood of '98 was nearly identical in water levels between Pope Chaucer and University Avenue, as was the New Year's Eve report. There may be less capacity due to growth in the channel, but the major problem was a miscalibration of the model, not the growth. It hasn't changed that much down there. In the director's report, it says every major storm and flooding event has its unique characteristics. That could be true. I didn't see any difference in the 6 floods I witnessed. They all behaved very, very much. They all went through the same cycles. You see a little bit of debris coming down. It's usually about 2 or 3 feet wide in the center of the channel. You'll see debris coming down and coming down. And then eventually the debris goes away because it's all been washed out. The waters come up and down at about the same rate. Not exactly, but very much the same. It doesn't come down in a big flush. It's not like a flash flood in Zion National Park where there's suddenly 30 feet of water. It rises over a few hours. The executive director's report says the New Year's storm resulted in high flows, creating a strong first flush of the creek channel. I don't know what that means, and I'd like to understand what a first flush is, because every flood has debris come down at first. The creek rose uniformly along its length. That's true. It always does. It always has. Rather than in a sudden surge, as occurred in 98. There was no sudden surge in 98 that I witnessed. Again, the same slow rise, and that's what the USGS shows. Overwhelming the Pope Chaucer. You know, overwhelming? I was standing at the Pope Chaucer at 2 a.m. in the morning at the peak. The amount of water coming over Pope Chaucer was a ½ inch. Most of the flooding occurred a 1/4 mile to 1/8 of a mile upstream from Pope Chaucer. Now, I'm not a hydrologist, so it could be that the constriction of Pope Chaucer is creating a problem that propagates a 1/4 mile upstream, but that's quite a ways. The director report goes on, the combination carrying the debris of a first flush, which I didn't see one, and the bank full flow over the length of the creek, which happens every time, resulted in nearly simultaneous overbanking in multiple locations. That is what happens every flood, both upstream and downstream of the Pope Chaucer Bridge. So I just object to the characterization like the New Year's Eve flood was different. It was nearly identical. I witnessed it in person. I walked it. Every one of these floods, I walked from my home up to Pope Chaucer. You usually can't go further than that because the water is flooding on both sides, and the police don't let you cross the bridge because they think you might get drowned or something. And then I walked down as far as Woodland Avenue to where the flooding is. The flooding, you know, if it's a big flood, that's a short walk. If it's a little flood, it's a long walk. But it's flooded down upstream of Pope Chaucer, upstream of University, 3 or 4 out of those 6 last floods. So I would appreciate if a little more firsthand knowledge is used. The engineers in Santa Clara Valley Water District said they were unaware of any flooding in San Mateo County because they didn't have the report. Well, why don't you knock on somebody's door and ask them what happened? Not just me, everybody else who lives there, you could just ask them what happened. All right, that was the major point. Minor point, East Palo Alto has put up sandbags to protect their citizens. And I don't know whether any analysis has been done to how much risk that has transferred to Santa Clara County. When Menlo Park, after 98, put up the same kind of barriers, Crescent Park threatened to sue Menlo Park, and they were taken down. East Palo Alto puts them up, transfers risk possibly, and they're still sitting there, covered with black plastic now so that you can't see that they're falling apart. Anyway, final comment. The terrace that's being talked about as being a choke point, there was no flooding above the terrace, but there was flooding immediately below the terrace. So the terrace is nice to get rid of. It's an ugly thing, but it's probably not truly a choke point based on 6 floods of observation. Thank you. Maybe I should stay here for if there's any questions, but usually there's no questions. So.
No, I don't think there'll be any questions. Once we cycle through all of the public comment, if the executive director wants to comment on some of the verbiage, I'll let her. The one point I will make before moving to Mr. Shore is that in relation to the last point that you made, Mr. Wiley, is that yes, all of us who live in this community are aware of the sandbags, and I can just say that the JPA and certainly Menlo Park as a city I know had nothing to do and was not in any way informed that sandbags would be put there, and I think that is a discussion for East Palo Alto and its lawyers about what could be some of the ramifications there. But as I like to say, that the water goes somewhere, like, right? And if I build something around my specific property or at my specific border, then that may solve my problem. But as a community, the problem is not solved because the water will go somewhere. Mr. Shore.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Shore. I'm a simple Palo Alto resident. I am here to ask a few questions. The first question is whether or not the planning will take into account Stanford's plan to release 1 million cubic feet of sediment into the creek bed as proposed in their NOP and NOI. A related question is, what is the freeboard assumption that is referenced in the HEC-RAS model? So in other words, there was a reference in the executive director's report that the recalibrated HEC-RAS model is appropriate if the freeboard is incorporated. So we've heard that from Mr. Anderson, there's a 20-25% margin of error. So is that equivalent to the freeboard? And is that going to be incorporated in the planning? And then finally, there are a couple different dimensions of flooding risk. One is physical, that is, do people get wet? The other is FEMA protection. So there are some areas along the creek, because it's a perched creek, where the lateral structures protect areas that protect homes that are outside of the floodplain from a FEMA perspective. If more water is released into that area, the hydrostatic pressure will make those lateral structures no longer certified. From a FEMA perspective, they'll be ignored. And so from a FEMA perspective, all of those homes will be in the flood zone, in the 100-year flood zone, where there is not currently. So those are the things that I just wanted to briefly mention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shore. So I don't have any other public comment cards, but I'll let the clerk do one last call to see if there's any additional public comments.
Would anyone like to make a public comment on agenda item 6A, Executive Director's Report at this time? I have no request to speak.
Okay, thanks. I'll turn it to the executive director and see if at least initially there's some things that you wanted to respond to, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I appreciate the community's comments on the staff report. The summary of the key findings were from the draft Schaffenweiler report. It's important to take this feedback from the community. I would invite, if Mr. Wiley has the opportunity to do so, we would like to encourage Mr. Wiley and others from the Menlo Park and East Palo Alto communities to come forward with their experiences. We will be setting up a meeting with the Valley Water and Schaffenweiler team to improve our data, our understanding, and integrate the community's input into the final report. So we would like to pursue that. And I think there was there were a couple of other, I think that's the biggest thing I think that I have to respond to at this time.
And then
Maybe Kevin has something else.
Sure.
I think
Mr. Murray.
to the point that there may be a solution that looks very similar to the current plan, that may be the case. But if there are, I just remind the board and the community, if there are any changes that cause new impacts or increase the footprint of the project, they are subject to CEQA and would be analyzed in the supplemental EIR.
And then to some of Mr. Shore's questions as it relates to the sediment from upstream.
We are keenly aware of Stanford's plans and have monthly coordinating meetings with them to learn more. Our projects have a reciprocal nature. I think Mr. Reinfleisch spoke very eloquently about the reciprocal nature of some of the project designs, and that is true for our two projects as well. The capacity we have in our channel influences how they build, design, build, and operate their Searsville Reservoir deconstruction, if you will. and the sediment load that they anticipate conveying through that new open dam structure, however it is, whether it's a natural flushing system, whether they truck some of it, whether the watershed will in the future convey a more natural load, we have to take into account what those numbers are. So, yes.
And then the freeboard assumption, is that?
I will let Kevin talk to that one.
I know I can't talk.
The statement made by the Schaffenwiller is that a HEC-RAS model is the appropriate model to use. The inclusion of the word freeboard, I believe, was indicative of planning an alternative design. And I don't think that came from the Schaffenwiller report. I think that was added by another author.
Okay. Totally fair. And Mr. Shore, I just encourage you to follow up directly if you don't feel like that specifically answers your question. And I will echo the executive director and the extent to which some of the verbiage doesn't match people's own history or understanding, and I think we're certainly open to hearing that. I think where there isn't much daylight is an understanding of the impacts, right? Of when the water does get out of the creek, right? Some of how that, the characteristics of how it happened. I think, like I said, we're open to hearing whether that verbiage is not aligned with people's recollection of those events. But I think fundamentally, like I say, I think there's alignment of what those impacts was, both for the New Year's flood more recently and for that of 1998. And that's where I think if you see that there's a misalignment between what we're saying and what you understand, definitely we want to hear, because that I think is critical to what we've already planned as far as these projects are and how we might need to change them going forward. So with that, I'll bring it back to the dais to see if there's any additional comments or questions. Who? Oh, I
make one comment?
Okay, sure.
HEC-RAS is correct.
Oh, you have to come to the mic.
HEC-RAS is a very useful tool as far as it goes, but it assumes that the creek is a linear structure. And there are two places where there are really sharp turns in the creek. One is where it comes down from Pope Chaucer and turns to go under University Bridge. That is a place where there's been a lot of overflow. The other is where it gets to the end of Edgewood and turns under Highway 101. That's essentially a right angle turn again. And if you think about a cup of tea or coffee, and if you swirl it, the water or the contents rise up on the walls. And the same thing happens at those turns. There's a centrifugal force, the water trying to go straight forward, but the walls try to make it turn to it's going 90 degrees in another direction. That means it's going to climb up that wall and before it finishes making the turn. And so the walls there need to be somewhat higher than the HEC-RAS model is going to indicate because of this centrifugal force in making the turn. So those have to be taken into account. And Jack Shu's modeling last spring, April or May, whenever it was, did mention that and take it into account. So that has to be included in the calculations.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, with that, this was an informational item, so no action from the board. And so with that, seeing no other board comments, I will move on to agenda item 7, board announcements, information items, and requests. This is information only. Quickly open it up to public comment on item 7. Is there anyone who would like to make a public comment on board member announcements? Okay, before you hear the announcements. Okay, we'll bring it back to the, if someone wants to make a comment after you hear the announcements, then you certainly are welcome to. So I'll bring it to the board. Are there any announcements, information items? No. There are two that I wanted to make sure I said are shared. And so for an earlier meeting, we had staff from Caltrain come and talk to us about their plans in connection to shoring the Caltrain bridge crossing of the San Francisquito Creek. And at that time, as I understood it, their plan was to wait and see as the water increased in level, and then have equipment on standby to shore up the north, right? That's the north bank, I think what you would sort of call the north bank of that crossing. Since that meeting, they decided that it would be more prudent to shore this up not during an emergency. And so there has been a shoring of that north side of that crossing with boulders, I think. Is there another more appropriate way to describe them? And so I did want to, and I know that this is not new news, but given that when Caltrain staff came and presented that to this board, there was lots of skepticism that that was the right path forward, and want to highlight that they went a different direction. And so, but then again, this is a temporary measure until they get to their more permanent shoring of that bank at the crossing. And so just wanted to share that out. Because I don't think we had shared that out, but if we had, and I just didn't hear it, then we've shared it again. And then the second thing I wanted to just share out that Director Bruce and Director Abrica and I participated on Tuesday with Congressman Kevin Mullen of certain points as it relates to the Safer Bay project, and really got him up to speed, additionally up to speed. It is a project of which he is intimately knowledgeable about, but providing him updates on where certain aspects of that project currently stand. There are still, to be clear, millions, tens of millions have been received or on their way from both the federal government, and from private parties, but there are still gaps as it relates to that project, and so certainly a need for additional funding. And so it was a great opportunity to share with him all the progress that had been made in terms of funding, but really to highlight what were some of the gaps and where there is going to be some additional funding. And so yeah, so I don't know if Director Abrica or the Executive Director want to share anything additional about that, but okay. So anyway, and is there any other board member has something to share? Okay, with and no requests to staff, other than to have a really great holiday season and a really good and fun new year. With that, I'll move on to agenda item 8, which is adjournment. Thank you.
Whoever made these, thank you.